And welcome back to Open Studio. Look at that, I remembered to turn the microphone on this time. So a little bit of other kind of behind the scenes stuff. So if you've been following this weekly, you will have noticed a gap between the last episode and this episode. So a lot has kind of happened, but I am back in the swing of things, so ready to kind of pick up. If you are watching this after the fact and you don't notice the gap between the two episodes, excellent. All right, let's get right to it. So just moving right on with, I'm going to finish up the horn here, and I think I left it pretty much on the top here. Again, it's been about 3 weeks since I've worked on this, so I'm not exactly sure. I should have watched the last episode to see where it ended, but it doesn't matter. It all has to get done anyway. So it's good. So how have you all been? Hopefully good. It was fun having to do the last 2 episodes with the voiceover. It taught me that it can be done, even though I was not prepared. You never want to do something like that because you have to. It's always better to do that because it's a good idea. But it made me realize that being able to do voiceovers, quality voiceovers, are going to be an important part, because that means I can go back and take a lot of my older content that never made it to video and get those on the site as new content, because now I can just do the voiceover for them. So that'll be something that you guys will see as we move along too. So I've got just that burnt umber and black, and I'm just kind of like rolling around this and just starting to just kind of throw in some of that texture detail before I go and airbrush around this. So this just gets those sharp lines. You guys are pretty close. I don't know how close I can get you. Yeah, it's about as close for now, but it'll give you a good feel for the whole thing. So again, it's just wonderful how beat up this bike is. So it's nice to be able to put in all this kind of texture, and it's like everywhere else, it's built up with several layers. So I can just kind of pick at it and mess with it, and there's not too much that can go wrong with it. Need to change out my palette parchment too. It's kind of getting filled up there. There's some blue in here too as well, which I'll show you in a second. But I want to get the dark edges in first so that I've got all that established, and then I can put the blue, and we'll get some airbrushing going on that, and we'll be good. So the other thing I have going on, I don't know what happened, but I caught some kind of weird cold. So I'm dealing with that as well. But fortunately, it's not as bad as it has been over the past couple of days, so it really let me get back to work, which is great. All right, so again, this is all about the texture. I'm not necessarily worried about the really neat fade that comes across this. I'm really just worried about getting that texture, and so that when I do the airbrushing, it'll just be seamless when it's done. So it's edges like the edge of the horn right here that's really bright. So I want to complement that by hitting behind it with a darker color. I've got some of that blue in there already, which is great. Yeah, so there'll be a lot of throat clearing, which normally I can edit out, but because essentially this is live, there's no edits in this. You are going to get the full boat. You're going to get all the ums and coughing and throat clearing, so you get it all. There we go. So again, just defining the edges where these screws are, that kind of thing. There's shading on the bottom side of the screws. That's going to happen with the airbrush. And the light parts of all these areas, I'm going to kind of hit that as we go along through the process. So it's a little bit of both. But right now it's all about that rusty texture that's on there. If the paint is too wet, I just repalette it, and then this brush is designed for really thin paint. So what's great about it is if I put too much paint on and it's still wet, if I can't see it, but if I go and palette off on like this is craft paper that I used to protect the Visionaire station, so it's semi-absorbent. So what I can do is I can repalette it off on the craft paper, it kind of takes a lot of the paint out. And then when I go back in, it'll actually suck up the paint, the extra paint that's on the painting. So it's kind of a neat thing. I do it a lot if I've got too much paint in the brush or it comes out too fast. It's very easy to just go back in with a dry brush, and it'll, as long as it's wet, it'll pull the paint right back up, almost like a little eraser. It's really neat. All right, this section down here has a lot of that blue in it too, so I got to kind of wait on that. But it's also some real cool corrosion in there, which I want to get as well. That looks good. This doesn't have enough texture. It's got the fade on it, but it's not got enough texture. So we'll throw some texture in here too before we go and do the next step. All right. Good. Now it's really dark back here too. What's going on back there? I can't see in the photo. All right. Yeah, the photo is great. There's a lot going on in the photo, and I just got to be sure that what I'm doing is not something that's behind the bike, that's not part of the bike, because I took this photo at a bike show. Actually, it was World of Wheels, so it was an everything show. There was a lot going on there. So what I have to do is I have to figure out what is part of the painting or what is part of the bike and what was actually behind the bike at the time. So I've already done it a couple times where I've included something in the painting that isn't really there. It is there, but it belongs to something else entirely. This little wedge here, though, does look like it's part of the bike. So it's also small enough that if I screw it up, it's not going to be like, you know, end of days kind of thing. All right, so that's pretty clear around there. I'm not going to do the back of the horn yet. There's some green, a great green wire that runs across there, although this is pretty dark, so we'll throw that in. I'm mostly concentrating on this area right here. It's the same thing. This is a painting in and of itself, so I can work on like this section and then move to this section. It's not going to affect the way things go. I don't have to do the whole thing at once, which is really nice. That looks good. Maybe a little bit more texture inside here. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so that blue. So what I do when I have to introduce that kind of blue, I look at the photograph and see where it falls. Like if it's everywhere, then I'll use the airbrush because it's easy. There we go. There's your edit. It's really easy to take the airbrush and lightly go over this whole section and add that, like the blue down in the fender down here. So I could add it pretty much globally to that area with the airbrush, which is nice. But sometimes it's really local, so it doesn't have to be everywhere. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. So I'm going to grab kind of a steel blue, which I have mixed up here because we've been using a lot of it. And I'm going to kind of repeat the process. So anywhere where there was texture, I'm going to start to introduce this blue. And what's nice is it's fairly thin, so it's just going to kind of blend in where it's sitting on top of a darker color. But as it gets out in the open, it becomes more of that bluish color. So it seems to be in spots, almost as if it's the raw metal showing through that didn't really corrode the same speed. There's a light area here too, so I want to kind of highlight that. The crease where these two shapes come together, where the horn actually comes out, there's a lighter area along here too, which I got to reclaim before I go too much farther. So I'm going to start with the blue there because it adds a nice touch. And you can see it's kind of a steel gray, so it doesn't add a lot to it, but it just kind of shifts it the right way. And I'll say it again and again, you know, this painting is all the way. It's like every detail that I can muster in this is going to happen. Doesn't always happen with paintings, depending on their speed and budget, especially with commissions. Sometimes people just want, you know, essentially a quick sketch of the image that they have. So it's things like this. It's these attention to details that would be left out. It doesn't necessarily make it a bad painting. It makes it a different painting. So this one is full boat. It's all the way. The edge of this is really kind of blue, so I'm going to wash over that as well. It's even down in here too. Down here, though, it's a little bit lighter, so I'm going to grab a little bit lighter blue over here, and this is going to be too light, so I'll just kind of mix it in with this darker blue here. Same color, it's like a grayish blue. It's the blue with a little bit of white and then some black. This will allow me to start to pull out this lower edge here. And again, it's inherently transparent, which is nice, but as I build it up, it's going to kind of lighten up as well, so I can start using this in different spots. Again, so if I paint this over a darker area and it's light, it'll actually be see-through and just kind of blend in. If I pull it out onto this area here that's brighter, it's going to show that it's real color. So grab a little bit more of that and keep that feel going. And again, all this is going to be blended back in with the airbrush, so I don't overly have to worry about how it looks right at this moment. For instance, in this section here, if I'm putting too much of this blue in here, I'll go back in after with the airbrush in a darker color and just kind of fade that out, and it's easy to adjust it. So it's important to keep in mind, because it's too easy, and I've done it a lot, where you think that this paint stroke right now is the final one, and you have to get it right. It has to be exactly what's going on in the painting. And once I got over not having to worry so much about that pretty much anything can be changed or fixed, it really opened things up. It gave me a freedom that was really, really nice. I wasn't worried about screwing everything up, because I knew things were going to get screwed up. You know, it's so much easier when you know you're going to, you know, kind of get it to the point where it feels like it needs to go in the trash bin, because you know you can pull it out. So, all right, there's a lot of that blue highlight up in here. I'm going to start it, but I'm not going to commit to it, or not going to hope that it lasts when I get airbrushing, because it'll probably get wiped out a little bit, but that's okay. As long as I have it in there, it's one step closer to what the final will be. And I can always go back and pull it out, you know, after, add a little bit more light to it to get it back. But for now, it's a good chance to put it in. Same thing here. There's a really nice kind of a brighter highlight here as the beat up edge kind of shows little reflections there. And it happens again on the back, but I feel like I'm pretty much in the right spot here. That's almost the same color, so that's good. All right, so dealing with this section right here, I went too dark here a little bit, but this highlight here is more orange, so it doesn't have that same blue cast to it. So I'll do the same thing essentially with this kind of tan color here. It's almost like a deep flesh color. Same thing, kind of transparent, so that when I first start putting this on, I can get a feel for how it's going to look. And then once I know that it's going to be all right, I can just pull this down and reclaim that little highlight. Again, I'm not worried. I'd rather put more of this on than I need, because it's really, really easy to just grab the airbrush and a little bit of the dark color and just fade that back away and get it exactly where I need it to be. There is a little bit of blue in there too, which I'll grab in a second. So we'll get the orange in first, like that. Looks good. I still have the blue, so we'll grab some of that. And that's looking like it's along the same highlight. So what's going on here, and it's easy to start to pick up on things as you're working. So there's definitely a light source coming from here, from this way. And it's light, it's illuminating this edge here, right here, and this. So it's nice now that I know that, and I kind of was picking up on it in other spots, but now that I know that any edge that's along this plane, anywhere in the painting, it's probably going to have that same highlight. And that's a subtle thing, but knowing that, even if it isn't there, like on the headlamp when I do that, you can actually kind of see it here in the HD stencil. But if I couldn't, I know that I got to kind of lighten that up more than everything. And that continuity throughout the painting will really help to kind of pull it all together. You won't have wonky light sources coming from different areas, and that's really big. All right, so there's a little bit more blue down here. This isn't bright enough for this, but again, it'll get it started, which is good. All right, again, I'm going to leave the back side of the horn because there's a lot of details in there that I want to kind of grab. I do want to kind of reclaim some of these screws here. And this palette is also 3 weeks old. So what I really, really should do, and I'll do this by the next episode, is pull that piece of parchment and reset the palette. This wet palette is awesome, and the paint is awesome, but it shouldn't be on there for 3 weeks without anyone using it. It shouldn't be on there for 3 weeks anyway, but it's still working for this. All right, so a few more blue dots in here, just to kind of bring that through, and I think we're in good shape with that. There's also a blue edges on here too. Same thing, as this little shape kind of fits into this ring that it's mounted on, or mounted in. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that blue, maybe a little bit of the darker one. And same thing, oh, there's a little hair in there, so get that out of there. This might be too dry now. No, it's okay. So I'm just going to kind of reshape that and pull that out as well. Yeah, this paint has had it. And you never really want to push. I mean, I'm all for getting everything I can out of everything, but you don't want to push paint like I'm doing right here. If it's dried out enough, you know, if it's starting to really like act funky, it's way worth it to just get, you know, start over with the paint, put new paint out on your palette. It's never worth it to really push it very hard. Because what we're talking is a drop of paint. Literally, that's what I'm trying to save here. Okay, that looks really good. Looks really good. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, yeah, I think we're in good shape. I'm going to grab the airbrush and the burnt umber, and I'm going to kind of fill in the gaps now. There's one more layer of detail that's going to go on after this, a little bit more blue, but that happens after. So we'll grab the airbrush, put this aside for a second. There we go. Just clearing out. There was water in here. If you airbrush and if you're airbrushing every day, this is a really good trick, and I learned this from one of my artist friends, and I just recently learned it. You think old dogs can't learn new tricks? So since I airbrush pretty much every day, at the end of the day, I'll put water in the airbrush, the cup, and then just spray it, but leave water in there. So that way the residual paint, even if it's just a little bit, won't dry in the brush. Even if it's just a little bit of paint, it'll basically freeze the whole side of the airbrush. It's not hard to clean it out, but it is a pain in the butt when you get it, you know, going in the morning. So if you have water in there, it never has a chance to set up. It's really neat. Now, obviously, if you say airbrushing once a week, the water will evaporate out of the brush anyway, so it won't really help you there, unless you put a cover on it, which is also possible with most brushes, except for brushes like the B. There's no cover for that. But yeah, really neat trick. So I did a Tech Tuesday on that, and I give credit to Philippe for that, because it was great. It was like, how have I gone this long without knowing this? It's great. So what I did was I put in the 40-50 mix. So that's the 1 to 10 mix. It's 1 part, and I'll keep repeating this in case you're coming in halfway. So this is 1 part 40-50 to 10 parts reducer, and it makes this really thin kind of reducer mix. It's nice. And I use that for any real tight detail. I'm going to put a new drop of black out because, again, this paint has had it. So I'm going to change out the palette anyway. Paintbrush. There we go. So grab a little bit of that black. I don't want a ton of it. Just a little bit on there. And we'll drop that in here. It's probably more than I need. And then I put... That's new. This is new paint up here. I put that out yesterday. So grab some of that. That's just burnt umber. And mix that in too. So I'm looking for that really same kind of darker brown that's going on here. That looks good. But the most important thing is it has to be transparent. That's what that reducer in 40-50 does. Even that little bit of paint will still have a lot of body. So by adding that 40-50 in the reducer, it makes it a lot thinner and gives me a lot more control over it too. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go over what I just did. I'm going to switch the nasty paint glove. So it's funny, when I use the paintbrush, the glove is on my right hand because I have my hand on the painting. But when I airbrush, I brace it with my, I'll back you up so you can see what I'm talking about. So when I use a paintbrush, my right hand touches the surface a lot. So that's why I wear the glove on this hand, so it doesn't get any of the oils on the other part of the painting. But when I airbrush, this hand is up off the surface, and it's my right hand or my left hand that braces it. So that's why, switch like that. I might have mentioned it, but I think, for, what are we on, 30 episodes, it's worth it if people haven't seen the whole thing. And some of the things that happen over and over again are worth repeating. And that's certainly one of them. Because I've been guilty of leaving my grubby mitts on my paintings and leaving all kinds of things I don't want to leave on there. Okay. So same thing. We're going to kind of, first I got to make sure this is paint and not reducer. So I'm going to start in this corner where it's darker. Ah, yes, lovely, lovely. You usually tell right away if it's the right kind of mix. And what I'm looking for when I say that is I want to see the paint kind of doing its thing. I want to see the paint coming out, but in a really controlled way. Especially with this kind of stuff. This isn't like fill in the blanks like down here, like in the side of the sidecar, lower half, where I'm just trying to cover that. This is really subtle. It's really like, fine detailed stuff. So I want to make sure the paint is flowing the right way. And this gives me a chance to do that before I really commit, because all this texture is blocking it if something goes, horribly wrong. But now that I can see it's working, I can spread it out onto the more exposed areas and kind of roll with it. Now this paint is super thin, and if you airbrush, or if you're getting into airbrushing, one of the most common things to have happen is spider webbing, which, do I have something to spider web on? Yeah, this will work. This will work great because it's a piece of plastic. So it's definitely going to do it because it's not absorbent. But if you spray with an airbrush and put it on too fast, you see what it did there? It'll just kind of bead up and then spray across. Now, if you do this on a semi-absorbent surface, it'll leave trails, and that's why they call it spider webbing, because it leaves all these legs. So thin paint does this really fast. So I got to keep that in mind. Most people think spider webbing is a bad thing, and it is when it happens, but it's just a course of business for an airbrusher. You're dealing with a liquid paint and a lot of air, so it tends to happen. You just have to be ready to control it and be ready for it, that it's going to happen in the first place. Now the good news with spider webbing is, because it is happening along the very edge of that a little bit, the real good thing is this is really, really thin paint. So with an eraser, I can actually erase a lot of that spider webbing off. If I had a big blowout, I'd have to fix it. But for this, it's so thin and so light, it'll be okay. Now this does have black and burnt umber in it, and it is really, this paint is great. If I keep working this area, it's going to go as dark as it is down here. So that's really nice. That's really the hallmark of a good paint, even when it's thinned out, essentially with a clear binder. You can still build it up just by putting layer upon layer upon layer. And that is certainly what's going on here, which is great. So I get all the control. Same thing now down in here on these highlights, just like I was kind of talking earlier. I can work on that lower edge of that highlight and just kind of push that back so it's not so in my face. The same thing here. So just kind of working around the whole thing, darkening it to the point that it needs to be at. And it's the less is more kind of mentality as well. It's easier to add more, so it's better to kind of, hold off on hitting it really hard and then adding, because it's so much easier to make this a little bit darker than it is to have to go and lighten it up again. And just letting that paint just kind of breathe out. Okay, so the front part of this, the inside of the horn, it's the same thing. I'm just going to kind of go over that heavier texture that I did to kind of blend it in and fade it out where it needs to fade out. Just kind of add that darkness. Give it a little bit more body. And there seems to be some texture around this blue too, so it is definitely some sort of corrosion. I can get away with doing a lot of this with this brush, so I could go grab the paintbrush, but it's nice if I can kind of blend the two tools, because then it makes it really, again, it's not so much about the tool, it's more about the final image. So if I make it difficult to see how it was done, that's what I want. I want the image to stand up before the, oh, that was airbrushed, or oh, that was a palette knife, or whatever. That feels good. The edge of this, right here is pretty dark, so I'm going to dump that down. I'm feeling good about that. Yeah, feeling good about that too. All right, so I think we're in pretty good shape in the back of this horn too. I was going to save that for after, but I think I could start messing with it now. Make sure you guys can see it, because it's got kind of it doesn't have the same blue cast that the front of the horn does. So I'm going to start with the shadow. I don't know if this is a mount, one of the mounts. I know there are two big mounts on the side, but whatever it is casting a shadow on the top of this, and I am getting some spider webbing on that, so I'll show you how I fix that. Actually, I'll show you right now since I'm thinking of it. So there is some spider webbing that happened on the top of that. Just gonna, what I'm doing is I'm sharpening my eraser. So I'm doing this off the side, and just using an X-Acto knife to kind of shave this down to get a sharp point on it. I should do this here. It's just dropping down on the desk anyway. This is a aggressive kind of a typewriter eraser. And for those who don't know, typewriters are something that they used when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. All right, I'm going to do this on this, but I don't have to because this is pretty dark anyway. But right on the top of this is some spider webbing. So if I just kind of go over this, and I don't want to hit it really hard. It's more like just a really soft touch, because this eraser is really aggressive. If I wanted to, I could strip it right down to the ampersand board underneath. So I just go really, really lightly. What I like about this is the aggressive eraser, because it's so hard, if you go real light with it, it's actually very controllable. A soft eraser would grab that paint and tend to pull off more than it really should. So you would think it would be the other way around. You'd think a softer eraser would be a little bit more controllable, but it's really the opposite. It's really that harder eraser with a light touch. Again, if you go at it, it's gonna definitely, you'll burn it right down to the canvas or the board in this case. So now I can just go over it again. It's a lot darker than than I had it. So again, I could have left all that since it wouldn't have shown up under the the shading, but there's also another shadow. I think this might be of the actual headlamp above, but regardless, it's here, so I'm going to put it in. Yeah, this is lovely. What is, I'm going to figure what that is. Oh, that's a sidecar. Okay, good. So easy to lose track. And I know I've already fixed that, because I think originally, if I'm remembering right, that was background color, this little section right above it, when it should have been sidecar. So that happens a lot when I'm working on a long-term painting that I don't really work on every day. I'll have to catch up, all right, where was I? What was I doing with this? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it takes a while to get back into it. Yeah, see, this is a whole separate painting. The brace that's holding it on, the nut that's here, that's going to be for the next episode. But it's basically the same idea, it's getting the base tone in, the rough shading and shadowing, getting the textures, the highlights, and then reintroducing the airbrush to kind of pull it all together. So that's what that is. All right, so that's where we're at. Let me pull it out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. There we go. Much better. And it's so funny you do all that work and it's just that little section. But that's what this painting's all about. All right, so for Steve Leahy at Open Studio, this is the Harley painting. Thanks for sticking around. Don't forget to click that like, subscribe, and really, if you know someone who might get a kick out of kind of tagging along with us, please share this too with them, and that'll be great. All right, so I will see you guys and girls on the next one. Have a great day.